Watering the garden is probably one of the most important needs of our garden plants, and also one of the garden tasks that can quickly get really old. But the idea of setting up a drip irrigation system can be confusing at best, downright impossible at worst. In today's episode, we're going to walk through my garden and talk about how I've set up my DIY drip irrigation system. And I'm going to give you the tools you'll need to create an irrigation system of your own. Welcome to Garden Things with Friends, where we share simple garden tips and tricks to help busy beginner gardeners build their dream garden. Be sure to check out the resources below the video as I share all my favorite recommendations, as well as bonus resources to this video. And if you love the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you never miss an upload. Now, let's get back to the video. Hey guys, and welcome to my garden and the podcast. This episode is a little different because I'm coming to you straight from my backyard. I'll be showing you in real time what my drip irrigation system looks like. So if you're listening to the podcast, be sure to check out the video version on YouTube. The goal of today's podcast episode is to empower home gardeners to set up their system and check watering off their garden to-do list for good. So just so that we are all on the same page, let's get a quick definition of drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is a way of watering your garden where the water is slowly delivered to the soil level of your garden plants over time, allowing the plant roots to use much more of the water that is delivered. And there are a ton of benefits for adding drip system to your garden. They're going to include enhanced water efficiency, decreasing your water bills. You're not going to spend as much time watering your garden. You're not going to have as much splashback on the leaves, and this is going to decrease any pathogens that are coming from the soil. And you won't have nearly as much runoff and evaporation. And these benefits can really help you see success in your garden, no matter whether you're growing in a small space or have a much larger garden. Now, when it comes to creating a simple irrigation system for your garden, you have quite a few options to choose from. As you can see, I garden mostly in raised beds and containers. So all of my experience is going to come from this type of gardening. As I talk about each option for your drip system, I'm going to show you the ones that I have available and how they're being used in my garden. Now, you can easily create a simple irrigation system using just soaker hoses. And a soaker hose system is simply going to require you to connect your main garden hose to soaker hoses or drip tape. And that tape is going to be snaked through your garden bed. This system doesn't require much work and can be used for a small garden or in-ground flower beds, like those that are in the front yard. Because the drip lines are connected directly to the garden hose, however, you could find uneven watering, especially the closer you get to the end of that drip tape. And I'm not really using this method this year. I used a form of drip tape last year in my raised bed, but I have changed all of my beds to a method I'm going to talk about in a bit. Another simple method of passively watering your garden is to use oyas. Oyas are unglazed terracotta pots that you can bury in your garden. As you fill them up with water from the top, they slowly seep out water into the soil. And if you were to dig up around the oyas at the end of the season, you'll notice that the roots of your plants will actually grow towards them. And I'm going to be placing oyas in two of my garden beds, my herb bed, as well as my medicinal flower garden here. And these two should have pretty minimal watering requirements, so I'm pretty confident that they're going to be a great way to try out this ancient technique. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this method for a large garden, especially if you want to have drip irrigation as a time-saving method, because filling each of these oyas in a lot of garden beds could be pretty time-consuming. Another option you can use for your drip irrigation system is a drip irrigation kit, or you can DIY your kit. This is what I used last year, and it worked fine for most of my plants. It did require a bit of trial and error. There isn't a lot of information out there about how to actually build the system, so you just sort of start connecting pieces and see what works. Now, some of the issues I ran into with this method was uneven watering the further from the emitter tubing I got, which meant some of my plants didn't get the deep watering required to thrive. Also, the further I got from the water source at my faucet, the lower the water pressure was. So the last method of setting up your drip irrigation system is by far the easiest, and it's what I have transitioned all of my raised beds to, and that's the Garden in Minutes garden grid. Now, when I renovated my garden this year and moved the beds to this southeast corner of my yard, I knew I was going to need drip irrigation that gave me much more even watering. And since my garden was going to be further from the watering source, I'd need to make sure that the water delivery was consistent. The Garden in Minutes garden grids checked off all of those boxes, and some that I didn't even know I needed checking, like following a square foot gardening method of fabrication to make watering individual plants more effective, and keeping my chaos gardening tendencies in check. So at this point, we know why we want to have a drip irrigation system, and we've decided on the type of system. So let's talk about how to practically put this together. Again, I'll note that you may want to check out the episode on YouTube because it's going to allow you to visually see what I'm talking about. The first thing you'll want to do when you're creating your irrigation system is to map out your space. I like to do this on graph paper, and I'm just going to draw out exactly where everything is in my garden, as well as where that water source is. You want to make sure that you also have measurements of distances between beds and from your water source. This distance can change how you distribute water to your garden, as well as how many different zones you want to set up. A zone is just an area that a particular system will be distributing water to. In my garden, I have 3 different zones. One goes to my raised beds, one goes to my containers and main green stalks, and one goes to my berry patch green stalks and containers. One thing you want to keep in mind is the more beds that you're distributing to, the less water that's going to go to each bed or container, which means you'd have to water for longer. I like to try to evenly distribute the square feet that each zone is covering, and that's why I have so many zones. Once your garden is mapped out, you can draw, probably in pencil, what drip irrigation will look like in your garden. This is quite simple with the Garden in Minutes garden grids because they have a ton of configurations based on the size of your garden beds. So for my garden, I'll simply list out the sizes of each bed. So all I really need to do is draw out my delivery tubings and connecting fittings. So now it's time to create your supply list and head to the hardware store or online. Some of the supplies that you're going to need are a faucet splitter. I use a 4-way, a pressure regulator, which will decrease the pressure from 50 psi to about 25 psi, hose converters, which are going to allow you to connect your faucet to the drip irrigation tubing. You'll need a timer. Now this is optional, but truly removes watering from your to-do list, a backflow preventer, water filter, drip irrigation hole punch. Now, depending on your setup, specifically if you're DIYing an irrigation kit, you'll need various fittings, connectors, emitters, and tubing, both the mainline tubing and micro tubing. To determine exactly what you'll need, you want to be sure you've walked through mapping out your garden specifically. And if that's still confusing, at the end of the episode, I'll be sharing a limited time service I'll be offering to help you build your specific irrigation system. I've also created a free drip irrigation printable guide that you'll see me walking through that you can take with you to the supply store. It's a PDF form, and I'm going to try to include some links to many of my online recommendations, and you can get a copy of that in the show notes below. With our supplies ready, it's time to set up our systems. Now I have a 4-way splitter on my garden faucet, and this allows me to run water to each of my 3 zones, as well as have a regular hose available for spot watering and filling my oyas. To set up your water supply, you'll connect your faucet splitter to the water source and then add on a backflow preventer. Now this is important because it helps to keep the water in your irrigation system from flowing back into your main household water supply. My timer has a backflow preventer incorporated, so I don't have that particular part on my system. And I really like these beehive timers, which are Bluetooth and Wi-Fi enabled, so I can water from anywhere. Then you can add additional filters. Again, my timer includes that as well, so I don't add an additional one. From there, you'll add on a pressure regulator, which will decrease pressure from 50 psi to 25 psi, as well as a line converter, which connects to your 1/2-inch distribution tubing. So the next thing I do is set up my garden beds. And with garden grids, this was as simple as connecting a few main sections and laying the grid in my bed. I'll admit, when I ordered slightly on the larger side. These grids are created right on the foot measurement, and many garden beds have odd measurements. This system does create their own garden beds as well, which can help decrease the overhang that you can experience when using the grids with other companies' raised beds. I'll also note that if you're using these with a raised garden bed that has rounded corners, you do have the option to order cornerless grids. You can check out these grids and get a 7% off discount by clicking the link in the show notes and using the code GARDENTHINGS at checkout. Now that the water source and the beds are set up, we'll run our line to our garden beds. I initially ran my distribution line out as I needed it and added 1/2-inch closure at the end. I use a combination of T and L fittings to connect my garden beds to my distribution tubing. At this point, I like to test my setup to make sure that everything runs adequately and get an idea for how long the system needs to run for even watering. For my beds currently, I run this zone every other day for about 10 minutes. After testing, you can set up your timer and truly enjoy hands-free watering. Now, I do want to note a few tips for making sure your system works for you all season long. And the first is to monitor your timing as the season progresses and your plants mature. In the heat of the summer, additional watering may be necessary. I typically water daily in the summer to maintain proper moisture. Additionally, watering early in the morning or later in the evening can ensure the water gets to the root zone. Afternoon watering is not ideal. Lastly, be sure to check your system regularly for any leaks or issues. Fixing these early can save you time and water in the long run. With a properly set up drip irrigation system, you can enjoy less time hand watering and more time tending to your plants and enjoying your garden. And with the ability to easily expand and customize your system, it's a great investment. Now, I know this episode was a ton of information, and I hope it has been helpful in guiding you through creating your own drip system. But inevitably, listening or watching isn't always enough. So I want to remind you of the free irrigation guide I created, which is linked in the show notes. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, I will be offering a service this season for those who would like more personal guidance on setting up your system. With this consultation, we'll do a virtual walkthrough of your garden, talk through watering requirements of your plants, and I'll do the planning for you. I'll list exactly what you'll need, where to purchase, as well as do a follow-up meeting for any additional questions you may have. And if this service is something you'd be interested in, you can learn more and fill out the form in our show notes, and I'll get you scheduled. All right, y'all, that is it for today's episode. This has been a lot of fun, and let me know in the comments if you'd like this format. I'd love to plan more episodes where we're in the garden doing the garden things in real time. Now, if you dug this episode, I'd be honored if you'd rate this podcast and spread the word to your friends who are also passionate about gardening. Your 5-star support fuels the growth of Garden Things with Friends, and together we'll cultivate a network of thriving gardens and plant-loving friends. Happy gardening, and remember, it's never the wrong time to grow where you are.